I presume you're here in order to learn of Magecraft. I'll have you know, there's no room for the weak-willed in this course, and despite your best efforts, the sorcery of our time is but a fraction of what it once was in the Age of Gods. Much of the craft is established through pedigree, and the culture of mages is riddled with deception and moral depravity. That said, if you insist, I shall do my best to educate you in this miserable, yet fascinating world.
In our previous lesson, I covered heroic spirits, beings recorded and summoned by the planet in order to protect humanity. Their existence is relevant to our lectures because mages have found ways of summoning heroic spirits for their own use as servant familiars. Thanks to innovations from the Holy Grail Wars in Fuyuki, the idea of a mage recruiting or otherwise partnering with an epic hero has become rather iconic, even though I wouldn't consider such practices common. Continuing on this topic, I wish to tie in our earlier lessons on divine constructs and mystic codes to more comprehensively discuss a heroic spirit's greatest weapon, that is, their Noble Phantasm. If gods or divine constructs take form in our world based on human worship, and heroic spirits are shaped by the fame and notoriety of their legends, then Noble Phantasms can be thought of as weapons, tools, or abilities directly tethered to those legends and beliefs. Perhaps the most easily recognized Noble Phantasm is King Arthur's Excalibur, a holy sword empowered through both fame and divine worship. It is so famous that Artoria Pendragon often chooses to conceal it behind invisible air in order to hide her identity. Just like heroic spirits, their Noble Phantasms are a composite of fiction and reality. Oftentimes, Noble Phantasms are actually physical artifacts that either once existed or can still be found today. Others, however, are conceptual manifestations of a hero's skills or accomplishments. When it comes to tangible Noble Phantasms, it is said that nearly every famous weapon or artifact has a prototype that once belonged to Gilgamesh, king of Uruk in Mesopotamia. His vast treasury, accessed through the Gate of Babylon, contained the original models of these weapons, which spread across the world after his death. These weapons are nameless, often looking different than their more famous counterparts, as they predated the legends and embellishments they later inspired. Some of these prototypes possessed mystic qualities of their own, while others were simply the ordinary blades that true Noble Phantasms were modeled after. Nonetheless, they are all powerful, sharing in that fame through association. Gilgamesh himself believes these prototypes are superior to their descendants, which he considers to be mere imitations. However, this has been shown to be hubris, as there's no rule stating an imitation cannot surpass its original. Naturally, there are many Noble Phantasms that prototypes do not apply to. Servants who employ reality marbles as their Noble Phantasms, for instance, do not rely on an actual weapon, instead deriving power from famous events or ideas. Oftentimes, a Noble Phantasm can be a skill that a hero mastered in life. In rare cases, the servants themselves qualify as Noble Phantasms. During early iterations of the Holy Grail War, it was believed that servants could only possess a single Noble Phantasm apiece. This has been proven false on many occasions, however. Medusa, for example, makes use of 3. Her Breaker Gorgon is unleashed when she removes her blindfold, sealing her foes in a realm of nightmares. She can construct the Blood Fort Andromeda to drain the life force of its captives. These two are often overshadowed by her main Noble Phantasm, the Pegasus Bridal Bellerophon. This lends credence to Perseus's legend, having used a combination of 5 Noble Phantasms in his attempt to slay Medusa. Let us not forget the paladin Astolfo, who gathered a handful of artifacts during his travels, from his hippogriff to his horn. Sometimes a servant can possess multiple Noble Phantasms through technicality. Gilgamesh, by claiming his entire treasury as a singular Noble Phantasm, can draw forth a nearly unlimited supply of weapons, so many that he uses them as disposable projectiles rather than close-range armaments. Given that his Gate of Babylon contains the prototypes of all other weapons, he can always conjure the perfect weapon to exploit his enemy's weaknesses. The same goes for Shiro Emiya's Unlimited Blade Works. His ability to project swords is his Noble Phantasm, giving him a massive supply of imitation blades capable of rivaling the Gate of Babylon. Lancelot's Knight of Honor is a conceptual Noble Phantasm that turns anything he touches into his weapon, allowing him to take control of modern technology, such as a minigun or a fighter jet. There are even cases of different heroic spirits all being known for harnessing the same Noble Phantasm. Semiramis's Hanging Gardens of Babylon, for instance, was never something she herself constructed. It is only through rumors and myths that she can use it. Similarly, we have cases where related legends overlap, allowing for different versions of the same Noble Phantasm, such as the dragon-slaying sword Gram being wielded by both Sigurd and Siegfried. In general, however, any given iteration of a Noble Phantasm is meant to be utilized by a single servant. Mordred, for instance, should not be able to steal and use Artoria's Excalibur to its full capacity. With a combination of permission and compatibility, however, it is possible for one servant to lend their Noble Phantasm to another, such as when Achilles entrusted his shield, Achilleos Cosmos, to Astolfo during the Great Grail War in Trifus. In a looser sense, Noble Phantasms don't even have to be limited to servants, allowing ordinary humans to harness them in battle. For instance, the Association Hunter Pazet Fraga Mikremitz carries around the Noble Phantasm Fragarok, which she can use to defeat servants with a causality-altering counterattack. Excalibur's lost scabbard, Avalon, was ultimately procured by the Einsburn family and used as a catalyst to summon Artoria for the Fourth Holy Grail War. The scabbard was used to help heal Irisfiel, and later her master, Shiro. In a similar case of borrowing a servant's Noble Phantasm, the demi-servant Mashu Kyrielite once lacked the identity of her paired heroic spirit, Galahad. Even so, she had access to a weaker version of Galahad's Noble Phantasm that she named Lord Caldeus, until later learning its true name, Lord Camelot. This temporary substitution is what's known as a virtual Noble Phantasm. As it turns out, a Noble Phantasm's true name is very important. Without it, a Noble Phantasm is just another weapon or tool, albeit still powerful in its own right. This is what turns Gay Bolg from a sharp spear into a deadly lance that targets its opponent's heart by manipulating cause and effect. Activating a Noble Phantasm's true name isn't always ideal, however. While it does tap into a weapon's strongest potential, it also reveals the servant's identity. As such, servants may choose to hold back in combat, only activating their Noble Phantasm when their victory is assured. Another reason to play it safe is that deploying a Noble Phantasm requires a tremendous amount of mana. That said, some Noble Phantasms are designed to be constantly active. Such is often the case for defensive types, like Karna's armor, Kavacha, and Kundala, which continue to protect him unless he intentionally removes them. The effects of a Noble Phantasm can also linger long after deployment, such as strikes that imbue curses. The Gay Booya, Dirmud's cursed lance, inflicts wounds that cannot be healed. Unless he is defeated or intentionally dispels the curse, Gay Booya's effects will linger. While it can be quite semantic, there exist various terms to categorize Noble Phantasms. This helps us quickly understand just what a given Noble Phantasm is capable of, which can be helpful for both their users and opponents. Let us go over some of these basic types. Often, Noble Phantasms are classified by the scope of destruction they cause. Anti-unit Noble Phantasms, often referred to in conjunction with the term single target, are just that, attacks that specialize in harming one opponent at a time. An example of this would be Antares Snipe, a Noble Phantasm used by the archer servant Cheiron. As the name implies, it is a sniping shot in which a star descends from the Sagittarius constellation, piercing an enemy from above. This can be contrasted with anti-army Noble Phantasms, such as Atalante's Phoebus Catastrophe, which strikes a much larger area. While anti-army attacks are considered to be more powerful, they also require more mana to invoke, and run the risk of harming innocent bystanders or buildings. What qualifies as an army can vary between a force of 100 or even a force numbering in the thousands. It's worth noting that the target for both anti-unit and anti-army Noble Phantasms can apply to one's own body or army as well. Atalante's Agrius Metamorphosis, for instance, is an anti-unit ability she uses on herself to transform into a monster, wearing the pelt of the Caledonian boar. Admittedly, the way these categories are termed can be contradictory or confusing. Such is true for Tawara Tota's Inexhaustible Bale, which despite being called an anti-banquet noble phantasm, can be used to feed an entire village. Kato Danzo's mechanical doll illusionary arts are classified as anti-beast, though it refers to the illusion of bull swallowing, and not the more specific beasts of humanity. Speaking of those beasts, the demon god Hivemind Getia aims to incinerate all of humanity with its noble phantasm Ars Almadel Salomonis. Fittingly, this is classified as anti-human order. There are also noble phantasms categorized as anti-crime or anti-evil, which are naturally effective against the morally bankrupt. In contrast, there are noble phantasms meant to harm the gods, such as Enkidu, the Chains of Heaven. In this vein, there are noble phantasms that specialize in attacking most any type of opponent you can imagine, from dragons to kings. Expanding on anti-army are anti-country noble phantasms, such as Brahmastra, implying that the power Brahma bestows to his right eye can be far more devastating than previously documented. There are also anti-fortress attacks, such as Quetzalcoatl's Piedra del Sol, which unleashes the destructive might of the Aztec megalith. Ishtar's Angaltaki Galshe qualifies among other things as anti-mountain. Going even higher in scale, there are anti-planet noble phantasms, such as Kiarisa Shoin's Angra Mainyu CCC. Her form is an Earth Mother that uses our entire planet to pleasure herself. Peak among them all would be Gilgamesh's Enuma Elish, classified as an anti-world noble phantasm for tearing apart the fabric of reality. More obscure is certainly the evil grimoire Prelati's Spellbook. It is seen as anti-principle, as its creator Francois Prelati suppressed his own reasoning through drugs to summon forth cosmic horrors. Then there's Medea's Rule Breaker, which is an anti-thaumaturgy noble phantasm that voids magical pacts. Not all noble phantasms are offensive in nature. Luminosite Eternelle, the banner held strong by Jeanne d'Arc, is considered a barrier for its protective qualities. There are also conceptual noble phantasms, such as Maxwell's Demon, a perpetual motion machine manifested through the denial of Newton's second law of thermodynamics. It is something that can only exist through mystery. David's Ark of the Covenant is fittingly categorized as a Covenant noble phantasm, likely for how it poses a threat to all who seek it. Irisfeel, when summoned as a servant with the Dress of Heaven, can use the Magecraft noble phantasm Song of Grail, manifesting her motherly nature as a blessing to her allies. In a rare instance, the servant Murasaki Shikibu derives her noble phantasm from poetry, specifically the tale of Genji. Her lamenting of this tragic tale curses her enemies. A spiritual noble phantasm is something like Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanova's VVV, in which she calls upon her spirit companion V and his mystic eyes of clairvoyance to expose her adversaries and their weaknesses. Lastly, some noble phantasms are categorized by their suicidal nature, most famously Jeanne d'Arc's La Pucelle, her sword that represents her burning at the stake. Even as a servant, she offers up her own life to protect what is dear to her heart. In summation, a noble phantasm is a servant's most valuable asset. It can take the form of their strongest weapon, a special technique, a mystic code, or even an obscure anecdote from their legend. Despite previous observation, we've seen cases of servants wielding multiple noble phantasms at a time, granting them a wide assortment of perks, from physical attacks to blessings, barriers, and curses. While usually beneficial, activating a noble phantasm runs the risk of exposing a servant's identity, functioning as a card to play strategically during a Holy Grail war. Not only are noble phantasms tied to the legends of heroic spirits, but we've also seen cases of mages being able to use these artifacts, handing them down from generation to generation. One of the more noteworthy cases happens to be with the mage Shiro Emiya, who practices a unique form of projection magecraft called tracing to replicate the appearance and abilities of many different noble phantasms. Thus, for our next lesson, I plan to elaborate on the true nature of Shiro's magecraft, and whether or not his unique approach can be replicated by other mages. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
you can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
Celebrate your fandom.